Hey Booktube, it's me. It's been a while. It's been a crazy last few weeks. And then this week, of all things, I find out that Katie over at Chapter Stacks has decided to take a little hiatus from Booktube. I totally get it. She's moving. It's all of this change and transitions, and she just needs to take a step back. But gosh, she joins Rincey over at Rincey Reads, who's also taking a break this month. And these two represent the biggest influence on my channel and the reason I got into Booktube in the first place. And Katie especially. She is responsible for giving a shout out to my channel when I was just starting out and pushing me over that first 1,000. And if you've been on Booktube, you know how hard that first 1,000 can be. So I owe her a huge debt of gratitude. So I'm sad to see her go, but I do understand it completely. So I'm dealing with that and the fact that at our office, we've lost our office millennium. I work at a small little startup. Our marketing team consists of 2 people, and with him gone, it's just me, and I am scrambling to stay on top of things. He really did a lot. Anyway, I'm happy for him. He's at a great new gig. A good friend of mine is actually his boss now. He's not even working now. He's on a plane as we speak, heading off to Australia for 2 weeks for a nice vacation. Clearly a bit of a bastard, but we're happy for him. And we'll figure all this stuff out. We're also in a state of transition. We may be looking at a new space. So I've been checking out different office spaces around town and dealing with all of that. So yes, Booktube has fallen a little bit by the wayside, but I don't plan on going anywhere. To top that off, it is the Booktube Prize. Last year, Robert emailed me and asked if I would like to participate in the Booktube Prize. And of course, sucker that I am, said yes. And then he came a-calling this spring. At the beginning, I felt pretty confident of the shortlist. I had read about a quarter of the books, but it turns out the cohort that I was judging, I had read 1 of the 6. And so when he came a-calling, I was panicked and maybe a little bit short. And I said, yes, I agreed to do this and I will do this because I promised to do this. But understand it's very begrudgingly because this represents the longest TBR list that I have ever had to contend with, which freaked me out to begin with. And I read at about a rate of a book a week, and that's assuming that things go well. Here it is. I have 5 books that I have 8 weeks to read. Seems simple enough, but if a single one of them sets me off in a slump, I am screwed. I'm in a panic. I don't know how it's going to go. I ended up being a little extra and a bit of a princess about the whole thing. But it turns out it wasn't a disaster at all, despite the fact that I wasn't allowed to talk about any of those books, which also I was freaked out about. It's like, what am I going to talk about on my channel? I review books here. So I ended up doing non-book review type videos, which also wasn't the end of the world. And the books I read were all equally good. I can't really talk about what I thought about them individually, but I can tell you the books that I read with my particular cohort. I'd already read Tommy Orange's There, and I was asked to read Claire Fuller's Bitter Orange, Aminata Forna's Happiness, Lenny Zumas's Red Clocks, Rebecca Mackay's The Great Believers, and Pat Barker's The Silence of the Girls. And it turns out I like them all. I actually blazed through all of them in just under a month. Now, I started off pretty diligently, panicked that I was going to hit some sort of slump, so I consumed them pretty quickly. But all of them were really super enjoyable. And what that meant is that I had May free for Asian Heritage Month. Now, I know Read with Cindy and a couple other booktubers are doing an Asian read-along with a couple prompts. And I say, forget that. Again, a little extra, I decided I'm going to read only Korean authors. And it turns out I have a ton of choices. There's a lot of great new releases or releases in the past year up for grabs. So I started off with Young Ha Kim's Diary of a Murderer that was recently translated this year. Now, this was originally released as a novella in South Korea, but this is a collection of short stories. Now, the title short story, Diary of a Murderer, fantastic read. I really enjoyed it. It is the story of Byung-soo, who is a 70-year-old veterinarian who was a serial killer. And he's raising his daughter, Yeonhee, which is actually the daughter of his last 2 victims decades ago. Of course, she doesn't realize that. That alone is a great setup. Add to that he is now suffering from what seems like the early stages of Alzheimer's. It was liked enough that it was actually turned into a movie called Memoir of a Murderer, a South Korean movie that is available on Netflix, at least here in Canada. I haven't had a chance to watch it, but I do intend to soon. The problem with it, though, is the book allows the author to leave things up to the reader. It can obscure certain things, whereas when you put it to film, it becomes very clear. So much so that they actually filmed an alternate ending to the movie just to obscure it a little bit. So I'm not sure. I think the movie that is released on Netflix wraps everything up in a nice little bow, whereas the story is far more bleak and a lot more threads left dangling. Now, the other short stories, same idea. It's just got a great little premise, and then it adds a little twist. The next story is about two childhood sweethearts that meet up after a long absence. And then there's this emotional loan shark that gets involved. Anyway, it's a little surreal. There's another one where a child who was abducted 10 years ago is returned to his birth parents. And it's hardly the joyous reunion that you would expect. And the final story, which is basically a Korean Hunter S. Thompson writing Naked Lunch while channeling Monty Python. And the thing was funny, over the top, but maybe even a little too over the top even for me. Anyway, the collection as a whole was great, and it was also translated to perfection by Chris Lee. Now, Chris, she's a professor of creative writing at Yonsei University in South Korea. Yonsei University is basically your Ivy League of Korean universities, the top tier. And she's also written an English language book on how I became a North Korean, which now I have to pick up. Anyway, Chris Lee, she is, I think, the perfect balance between an originalist like Sora Kim Russell, who also teaches in South Korea, and the activist writer of Deborah Smith, who learned Korean 6 months before translating her first work. So there's a bit of a difference there. Chris Lee, I think, straddles that line beautifully, still sticks with the declarative style of the Korean language without adding too much of the English flourishes, just enough to smooth things out. Anyway, I really enjoyed her translation of this particular work. So I managed to finish that. So then I jumped over to Susan Choi's Trust Exercise, which was just released this year. I really did enjoy it. The first chapter, all 3 chapters are entitled Trust Exercise. The first Trust Exercise follows the story of 2 high school kids in a dramatic arts school. Now, I guess individual results may vary depending on what your experience was like in high school. I really enjoyed my experience in high school, so maybe that's part of it. And I recognize those drama clique kids. Now, I never took drama, but I certainly was aware of the drama kids who were all a little extra at our school. And we had a bit of a pedigree, too. 2 of the twins, Jack and Jill Hennessy, would go on to some notoriety and fame. Jill Hennessy is probably best known for the TV series Crossing Jordan. Anyway, they were a year ahead of us. The drama department, they took things very seriously. So I recognize that aspect that she talks about, as well as the romance between David and Sarah, and just how crossed signals and their different interpretations of that can change how they feel and can sort of break them apart. Anyway, it was done so well. It was like YA's literary fiction. I really enjoyed that first part. The second chapter, Trust Exercise, switches the perspective. We go to a third person, then we slip back to the first person. And it's a little jarring, and we get this weird little thing where the characters in the first section, well, those aren't their real names, but their real names are never really mentioned. And then we'll decide we'll go back to the names used in the first chapter. And it just seems like a lot of hubbub over nothing. And there's this other thing that the narrator in the second part does, and that is providing definitions. Now, I get it. She's gone to therapy and she has a very distinct way of processing things, but it's one of those cliched tropes that make me cringe a little bit. Going through high school, I don't know how many essays I probably wrote or read that included line fillers like, the Oxford Dictionary defines satire as. Anytime you invoke a dictionary, it just seems like a bit of padding and it just makes me a little cringy. Now, Susan Choi, obviously far more accomplished than I am, handles it a lot better, but I still can't help that sort of knee-jerk reaction every time I come across a dictionary definition in the text. Anyway, I finished that, enjoyed that as well, and now I am diving into Miracle Creek by Angie Kim. Miracle Creek, that is our Discord book club read for the month of May. And again, I've mentioned it before here on the channel, but if you haven't already, come join our Discord. We have a different book we pick every month. We read along, and then we get together at the end of the month to talk about that, and probably a little bit of food and other things as well. And it was a lot of fun. It's tough to get everybody together in one place, considering we're scattered all around the world, but we do make it work. If you haven't had a chance, check out the link down below. Come join us at the Discord book club. And just, drop us a line, say hi, and, get used to the place. Maybe it's for you. We'd love to have you there. That's 3 recently released Korean books. I'm also diving into Edward Lee's Buttermilk Graffiti. I think it was released last year. Ostensibly, it's a cookbook. But Edward Lee actually travels around the United States, visiting different immigrant communities and talking to them about food and how they adapt to the American lifestyle. The writing is fantastic and the recipes look great. And it's less about the recipes even for me and more about the writing. Anyway, it's one of those things that I can dip in and out of over time as I'm reading some of these other stories. So my cup overfloweth with Korean literature. So get on that bandwagon and pick some up yourself. Now, if I manage to finish Miracle Creek before the end of the month, there is no shortage of other Korean books that I can pick up. So I think there is At Dusk by Hwang Sok-young, The Court Dancer by Kyung-suk Shin, as well as Flowers of Mold, a collection of short stories by Seong-nan. Sorry, I probably butchered every single one of those Korean names. If I had seen them phonetically in Korean, perhaps I could pronounce them a little bit better. But honestly, my wife and I lived with a friend of mine from high school. The only other Korean in my grade, a fellow that I'd known all my life, is Jo Cho. It wasn't until I saw his name spelled out in Korean that I realized that he had let us, myself, everybody at the school pronounce his name wrong. His name was not, in fact, Jo Cho, but Jo Che. But getting people to pronounce it properly just became too much of a thing for him. And Jo Cho, it rhymes, so he just went with that. So I apologize with all these Korean names if I've pronounced them wrong, but if they were presented to me in Korean, perhaps I could have read them out correctly. Anyway, that actually amounted to a TBR, and despite the fact that I think TBRs are bullshit. So, I don't know, maybe things are changing. Maybe the whole Booktube Prize thing has changed me as well. I don't know. Anyway, this is a bit of a rambly video. I don't know how it's all going to turn out. I'm just throwing it out there. It feels like it's been too long since I shot a video, and it's important that I get something out there. I don't even know what the editing process is going to be like for something like this. Maybe I'm just going to cobble it all together and throw it out there. By the time this comes out, the Booktube Prize quarterfinals will be announced. I can talk about those books. I can get caught up on all my book reviews on Goodreads. I am like months behind on that as well. Anyway, it's a complete disaster over here. I just need to get things back in order. So give me a little bit of time. I'll get my head on straight. Anyway, I hope you all have a great week of reading. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.